Welcome back, accounting students. This is Mrs. Bloomquist, and this is the first lesson in Chapter 3. Now, Chapter 3 is all about journalizing transactions, and the first lesson in Chapter 3 deals with recording transactions and using the general journal. This one is pretty important, and it's pretty foundational to a lot of activities that you will be doing going forward. So the lesson objectives here would be to define what a journal is and explain why it's used to record transactions, to compare and contrast different types of source documents, and then also to identify the 4 parts of a journal entry. And identifying those 4 parts of the journal entry are going to be very helpful to us as we complete many journal entries going forward. Okay, looking in your book, I'm on page 58, and you'll notice that there are quite a lot of vocabulary terms that are showing up on pages 58 and 59. You want to keep track of the fact that a journal is the form that we use to record our transactions, and we always record them in chronological or date order. We start at the top of the page and we work down, and recording the actions that the transactions that the business is working through, this is called journalizing. So as we're doing it, we're journalizing. And the general journal, as you're looking at it, and you would see one on the top of page 58, the general journal has 1 column for debits and 1 column for credits. It also has the column for the date and the account title, and it has a notation that you can include about a document number or a reference so that you can keep track of everything that's going on in this general journal. So you can see here document and some reference information. You want to make sure when you're posting transactions into a journal that you're always double checking for accuracy. I think one of the things we found out just even starting way back in chapter 1 is if you make one mistake in one area, then all of the information going forward that impacts that account is going to be wrong. And so we just want to be very careful to be accurate when we're posting information within a journal. So accuracy, 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 very key to making sure that your journal is correct. It is then a chronological record, and so every single day when businesses have transactions, they post them into the journal, and then they have this nice record of everything that's happened within the business. Now, you want to make sure that you're comfortable with the idea that we use double entry accounting in our transactions, in our record keeping. So every time we have a transaction, then it's called an entry. And the process of putting in the debit and credit parts for each of the transactions, this is called double entry accounting, and it is the whole premise behind accounting. And it's also how we are able to keep the accounting equation in balance. We have some very, very, very important documents called source documents. Those are what we work from, and source documents are the invoices that we receive in the mail. They are the checks that we receive in the mail, and then we go ahead and issue a receipt for so that we have some kind of documentation. The reality is, without those source documents, we don't have any proof that a transaction occurred. So source documents are critical for proving transactions. The business form that orders a bank to pay cash out of the bank account is called a check. That should make a lot of sense to us. We don't pay all of our things using cash. Sometimes we use a check. And so we just want to be comfortable, hey, a check is what orders the bank to pay. The form that describes goods and services that have been sold, things like quantity, price, other terms of the sale, these are an invoice. And whenever services are purchased or sold, an invoice is generated. Okay. Sales invoice, now this is the source document that records a sale on account. Okay. So a sales invoice, sometimes we call it a sales ticket or a sales slip. Just make sure you know that the sales invoice is for sale on account. A receipt, this is the written acknowledgement that cash has been received. Cash goes to the bank. So if you don't have a receipt, then you have some difficulty proving or creating some kind of source document. memos. A memorandum is a brief message that we use to describe a transaction, and we want to make sure that anytime we have activity that we have some kind of source document that supports that activity. As we think about accounting or potentially forensic accounting, if we don't have source documents to prove things have happened, then we could really run into problems with our accounting and proving transactions for the business. A calculator tape. Oftentimes businesses run a calculator tape for lots of different reasons. I can tell you when I was running deposits to the bank for the physicians that I worked for, every day I took the deposit from our billing department into the bank, and we used a calculator tape as our record of all of the checks that had been received. All right, so as we start to analyze some transactions now and think about the debit and credit parts of a transaction, and also then going ahead and journalizing this transaction, cash received from owner as an investment. We obviously have been talking about this type of transaction since Chapter 1, cash received from the owner as an investment. Now, we're going to go ahead and do our T account where we look at cash, and when we are increasing cash, we realize that's the debit. We are also going to be looking at the Michael Delgado capital account, and since it's increasing, we know that that is a credit. Now, as we're looking at our general journal, you can see that we are going to go in a very specific format when we're updating this general journal. So we wrote the date. The account title that is to be debited always goes first. So you always list your debits before your credits. We're going to debit cash for $2,000. We're going to go ahead then and indent in for our credit so that we can see that Michael Delgado Capital is the credit for the same $2,000. You'll notice that when you're working through Aplia that these automatically indent for you. And then finally, you need to make sure you record the source document so that your forensic accountants or your auditors, when they go back and look at your journal, they can find everything they need. This is receipt number 1, so we're just noting R1 here. All right, so now we paid cash for supplies, and we're going to use check number 1. So we're going to be debiting our supplies, we're going to be crediting cash, and you can see in our general journal here, supplies comes first because it is the debit. So we'll see the date is the 2nd, and we're going to go ahead and put in supplies in the amount of $165. We're going to go ahead then and credit cash for $165, and our document is C1 for that check. All right, so in what order are transactions recorded in a journal? So what is the order that we use? We put them in by date. We start at the top with the current date, and then we just work right along through that journal as we go. The newer transactions would be towards the bottom then. Why are source documents important? You will find as you go that source documents are one way that we verify the accuracy of our journal entries, but it's how we prove business transactions have actually happened by having those source documents and having them available to use. All right, the 4 parts of the journal entry, and this is going to be an important thing to keep track of. You want to make sure you always record the date, the debit, the credit, and the source document information. As you're going forward and you're starting to think about what else is at play here, you might want to think about the kinds of procedures that you might put in place to help someone who has never journalized activity using a business document, and what types of records or forms could potentially be used then as source documents. So those would be some good questions to think about as you're moving forward. Go ahead and do the work together and on your own for 3-1, and when you're done with those and you have your form completed, you can go on to 3-2. Good luck, everyone.